Alright, let's see here. It has been 2 months since I've made a video. Huh. Okay, well, let's see what we got in the backlog. I mean, there's bound to be a couple of those videos in the chamber, right? Ah, here we go. Oh, never mind. That one's gone. Alright, well, let's take a look at the scripting full. Oh, never mind. That's gone too. Well, guess it's time to go back to old reliable. Let's work on the Death Stranding retro. Oh, well, there goes 4 years of my life. Well, I guess there is one more left. Welcome back, one and all, to the most fantastic circus of all time, the Popo592's original YouTube channel. Trademark, please don't steal. It's been 10 months since the last scripted video, and an entire year since the topic of this video. The reception to that video was impeccable. 31k views in what felt to me as a personal defibrillator to the community.
Oh no. I say when we're
I don't consider myself to be of any standard compared to the Deltarune community staples at the moment, but I plan just the same to stay relatively active. If I may take a moment to advertise, my inspiration to revisit the community derived from a charity event, the Spamton sweepstakes. But my further inspiration was due to a YouTuber named KazooCat in their video named The Music of Deltarune AUs. Now, this video is by no means required reading for today's video, but the reason it inspired me so much to return is because it reminded me of how dedicated this community actually is. I mean, seriously, I don't think people give you guys enough credit. Creators like BenLab, Wormy, Saster, Chart, Taskuel, The Joker, and newcomer to the community RV Pine, all golden geese that shit hot fire like it's nothing. And then there's the immensely talented professional, Camilla, who without fail has come around every chapter to release a professionally produced single. Once again, it really can't be stated how fucking talented this community is. It's crazy. And don't even get me started on the artists, because that'd be a whole different, 40-minute video. Anyway, that's enough praise for the amazing creators out there. Now you're stuck with me. So what's the plan, Jan? Will I disappear every video for 8 months? Yes. Of course, I'll make my videos and theories when chapters drop. That's easy content. Plus, whenever I'm brought up to attention of something expansive enough to make a video on, understand my plight, it's a little difficult to develop content on 6 hours of gameplay in 2 chapters. Again, that's why I'm very thankful for the other creators who actually end up doing the detective work for me. It saves me hours of having to look through files or getting lucky with web page timing. Even though I have to do some of it anyway to ensure they're not lying or miss something. Anyway, that was a lot of digression for what this video is about. Okay, so what is this video about then? Well, you read the title, Deltarune Theories and Further Explanation. I am going to further elaborate on my old theories and present some new ones. So grab yourself a hot cup of friend-flavored tea, and here we go! Okay, here we go. Just what everybody needed, another YouTuber Andy talking about December holiday. You're running out of content. Yeah, I know, okay? So I was loosely inspired by another theory made from another YouTuber by the name of JaruJaruJ. I would say a very well-known creator in the community. But we're coming to different conclusions. He finds that December is based off of a music video of some sort by Toby Fox, and at the end of it, there is some sort of time reset. It's a valid theory, but personally I find the ending unlikely. On my side, we need a little more context. So without further ado, I actually want to take time to further explore the character that is Des, because the whole concept around her is what I would describe as enigmatic. What intrigued me about December was the idea that December, in a way, is an alternate universe Gaster. And I know what you're thinking, that sounds really fucking stupid. Just let me get past the buzzword diarrhea and it'll make more sense. Now, I don't say this lightly, but rather because their stories are remarkably similar. Noelle's long-lost sister that everybody just kind of forgot existed, with a trail of breadcrumbs left by Toby Fox. To be fair, these stories are substantially different, they're not the same thing. The main problem being is because Des is allowed to be talked about, while Gaster is straight up censored from the entire universe. In this circumstance, it seems everybody stopped talking about December not because she poofed from the universe, but rather because the memories remind the family of something tragic. Now, my active headcanon, or theory, is that December was a rebellious teenager that ran from home. Little did Des know, somehow she got mixed into a circumstance with Gaster, and then somehow lost inside Deltarune's code. Now, I'll further explain this later, but there's a decent amount of evidence to support this. I'll be using a couple different sources for this. 1, a personal playthrough, 2, the wiki, 3, public knowledge, and 4, the Spamton sweepstakes. Now let's get into the depths of it. Looking directly at the Deltarune wiki, we have about a page of context to work with. The word des is mentioned twice in Chapter 1, and then a couple more times in Chapter 2. Now, obviously, Des, or December, the character, is not there, at least in the town. Outside of my theory, there's currently 2 common active theories surrounding December, and it's 1, she's dead, or 2, she's missing. I want to specify, there's a lot more evidence to support that December is missing rather than that she's dead. 1, there's no grave for December in the graveyard, there's only 4. And those graves are for Garrison, Snowdrake's mom, Shiren, and some dog. The latter 3 representing the Amalgamates. I'm not going to get into this right now, but this further represents a common theory. The theory is that Deltarune is a mirror AU of Undertale. Basic AU concept, same universe, just with slight alterations. It essentially just means we haven't strayed from the same timeline. Chronologically, I mean. Meaning all the events that happened in Undertale also happened here in Deltarune, just with different outcomes. Anyway, let's get back on track. We'll come back to that later. So, December is missing. Chapter 2 established that all the rooms in the Queen's Mansion are based off the user's browser history. It's not hidden, they just straight up tell you. So in Noelle's room, we find something interesting. There's a calendar on the wall, and when interacted with, it says, every page is the last month, meaning December. Every day is the 25th. Now this has a double meaning. Of course, December 25th is Christmas Day. But in actuality, I doubt that Noelle is looking up when Christmas is. It's established that the Queen's Mansion often confuses the representation of search results. For example, Piano Tutorial came out as tutorials playing piano. Okay, so, December 25th, Christmas, is a holiday. So what we can decipher from this is that Noelle is not looking up Christmas, but in fact, December holiday. I discern that Noelle is actually searching for news about her sister who went missing, looking up December holiday, and instead only getting Christmas. A gut-wrenching, cruel, and ironic tragedy. Short cutaway to update in the last video. Remember last video when I was like, Sans is from Deltarune? Well, that was pretty much confirmed to be true. So on top of all the evidence I said last time, watch the video if you haven't watched it, in all console versions of Undertale exists a dog shrine. Dog shrine. But luckily, there exists a video. Thank you Jackie720 that shows all the dialogue from the shrine. From what I can pick up here, the more money you get from the slot machine, the more snow shows up on screen, or Sans calls it fuzz, like from a dog, I guess. Well, when you reach 1,000+ particles on screen, or 1,000 snow, or fuzz, or whatever, Sans will give you some dialogue, and he says,
"Whoa, it's looking like a blizzard in here. I've only seen it snow as bad as this once. You could barely see your bones in front of your face. But even so, the king was out there in red and white, putting down presents for everyone. Am I Sans, Luigi, or Bernie Sanders? I don't really know. Mamma mia, Tony Soprano."
Okay, now here's the important lines.
Papyrus, the yellow kid, the antlered girl, and her big sister, he even had a little something for me, even though he didn't really know me.
Now these are some very unusual lines. They establish that, for some reason, Sans met Kris, Des, Noelle, and Asgore at some point earlier than both Undertale and Deltarune, which directly contradicts Sans himself. When you first meet Sans as Kris, Sans doesn't recognize Kris, and Kris does not recognize Sans. And Sans says he had just moved to the town, which is kinda strange if he met Kris, Des, and Noelle as a kid with Papyrus. I mean, really the outlier here is Papyrus. If Sans had not moved there yet, why is Papyrus there? Here's an interesting concept. Was this even Undertale's Papyrus? Is the Undertale Papyrus even Undertale's Papyrus? How long ago was this even? And just because Sans had just moved there doesn't mean Papyrus didn't already live there. There's no real gotcha moment on this one. There straight up just is not a definitive conclusion to explain this, at least not one I can think of. So far, it's just a thing that happened. At one point, Sans went to Christmas. Anyway, regardless, I would say definitely pay attention to that. If you're a theorist Andy like me, keep that story in mind as it might come up later with new chapters. Too Long didn't listen. Sans is at least aware of Deltarune's universe and has been before Chapter 1. Or maybe not Chapter 1, but it wouldn't really make much sense otherwise. Alright, since we were already doing this anyway, let's do another follow-up to the last video. So to start off, we have a further analysis on a previous theory. A lot of people were convinced that Deltarune doesn't have shit to do with Gaster, and I don't blame them. The theory was choppy, and to be honest, the last video was too. I do still believe the general concept was provided, the point I was trying to get across, but knowing what we know now, I was probably right. Well, not quite. But I was right that someone is in possession of Kris, Christopheles Deltarune. And now I can prove it. First things first, we're going to look at the intro. When you first start up Deltarune, you're given some dialogue. This dialogue says, "Are you there? Are we connected?" And then the soul of Kris shows up. Next, it says, "Excellent, truly excellent. Now we may begin. You must create a vessel." You create a character and get to the name selection. In this name selection, if you type in Gaster, it will crash your game. Now, this may seem very obvious to someone who's been in the community for a while, but this is actually very important. For context, if you didn't watch my last video, which again, you should, long story short, Gaster is an Undertale character for the most part. Undertale and Deltarune are supposed to be separate universes, and for the most part are not directly connected. So I just contradicted myself. Why would this matter on the naming selection? The answer is actually less contrived than you may think, and that is, for verification purposes. This may seem a little far-fetched for some, but keep your mind open for a second. Consider this Schrodinger's Gaster. For this concept, Gaster is the cat, and Deltarune and Undertale are the box. Is Gaster alive? What is the status of Gaster? We don't know, but he is in the box. The crash of the program at the very least confirms the existence of Gaster within Deltarune's universe. He is in the box, and it goes further beyond this. We can prove that Gaster is in the box. If you're active in the community, you may already know this next concept. Undertale and Deltarune use a strange system called typer values. Essentially, they're a type of code that specifies how scenarios run text within any given moment. For example, let's take Sans, because his value is a relatively outlying variable. Sans has a typer value of 14 and a very distinguishable font of Comic Sans. We can use the setup of Sans to pinpoint how Gaster's type value would be laid out. But wait, Gaster never speaks. Except that he does. So we gotta go all the way back to 2015 and into the code of Undertale. Here, we will find that Toby Fox used typer values in this game as well. Entry number 17 is almost irrefutably Gaster talking, and furthermore is the only lead we have. Entry number 17 has a typer value of 666. Grey Door, where a sighting of Gaster is located, only occurs if the player has a fun value of 66. Gaster, in Undertale's code, has battle stats, although he never appears in-game. His stats are 666, 666, HP, attack, and defense, and negative 666, 666, EXP, and gold win conditions. So obviously, Gaster has a relation with the number 666, or 66, or just 6. But let's be honest, it's 666. To loop this all the way back around, we have to look at the typer value for the first narrator in the intro of Deltarune. Oh, and what's that? The narrator is set to a 666 typer value. And since typer values don't repeat, this confirms at the very least that Gaster is the narrator in the intro of Deltarune. Dear God, I never want to say 6 again. But wait, there's more. It goes even deeper than that. But I digress, let's try to stay focused here. You may have noticed that I've neglected to include an important event within the intro, and that is the ending. That's right, my claim before was that Gaster was in possession of Kris, and this was proven because Gaster straight up claims ownership over Kris's soul. Or at least he should, I mean that's what happens in the intro. And with everything I've aligned, this should be the case. But it's not. And of course it's not, because to complicate things further, there's 2 narrators. Yes, that's correct. At the end of this scene, there is a distinct second narrator with a completely different type value.
Every single person.
Alright, we'll get to it in a minute, but first we need some context. In Deltarune chapters 1 and 2 respectively, exists a character who is lost in the code. If you have not heard about this yet, you're gonna want to. Strap in, this blew my fucking mind. In chapter 1, the unused dialogue under an event labeled The Return says,
Where am I? Hello? Anyone? Is anybody out there? Someone? Anyone? Can anyone hear me? It's dark. It's so dark here. Someone, anyone, if you can hear me. Say something. Please.
Then in chapter 2, it continues, saying,
No one can hear me, can they? I guess not. To be honest, I'm not even sure if I can hear myself. It's so quiet here. And yet, sometimes, I swear I hear something. Something.
And that's all the dialogue we have from this character, at least until chapter 3 comes out. Now with that added context, we can move to the next segment. I have 5 candidates for who this code character could be. Number 1, December. No context on how it happened, but she met the same fate as Gaster in the Deltarune universe. Unlucky. 2, Gaster. Pretty unlikely, even though I claimed it in my last video, but I'll explain this later. 3, it's Kara. They are cynical, which matches their personality, but I didn't check their type values. Regardless, I'll explain later in another section how this makes more sense. 4, Kris. The general idea is that every chapter they get pushed out of their body, and therefore they get placed into the code. Since matter can't be deleted, it has to be displaced. Number 5 is that this is just some random goner. Is this what the followers of Gaster experience? It's possible. There's no real explanation for how this could be, but it would explain at least who this is. Let's start with how it could be December. So, December disappears out of nowhere, and Toby Fox starts leaving breadcrumbs. This story is very similar to Gaster. I mean, it really is like a alternate universe Gaster. And with that concept comes the idea of that this universe, the Deltarune universe, is a replacement universe of the Undertale universe. A sort of mirror image, if you will. That every character in Undertale has an equivalent in Deltarune. There's absolutely no way I can prove this by any means, especially with only 2 chapters. I guarantee Toby Fox and the rest of his team will explain December's story later on, at the very least inside of the code. But December just happens to be a mysterious character at the moment, so of course it makes sense for everyone to just default to her. Basically what I'm getting at is we can't really prove that this is December because we don't know enough about December to even know what she would be like to begin with. And to get this video out at a reasonable rate, I don't have all day to scrape through the entirety of the Spamton sweepstakes or the Deltarune website. But within those 2 websites, there is interesting content within them. Maybe I'll make a video on it one day. A couple that stick out are the most well-known and obvious one, deltarune.com/des, which leads you to a guitar. I vaguely remember a webpage related to December that said find her or something, but I wasn't able to find it again. And most interestingly, to further add fuel to the theory that not only is December a Gaster equivalent, but also this code character, the deltarune.com/December page leads you to a pseudo 404 removed page, kind of like she is from the game. Anyway, we don't know a lot about December, so let's move on. It might be December, but we won't know until later. Gaster is the easy one out of the 5, because this character does not talk like Gaster. This is pretty obvious because their type value is 1 above Gaster's. This actually gives a lot more fuel for this code character being the second narrator in the intro. The character specifically mentions scratching coming from below them or around them. If anything, this would mean that Gaster is the other thing making noise in there with them. In fact, that's probably the most likely scenario. Now, mind you, that's not how type value works in Deltarune or Undertale, but if you're stuck inside the code and you're in some sort of black void, scratching coming from below you because type value would be 1 below you would make some sense. Also, garbage noise, a noise that's directly related to Gaster, sounds a lot like screaming and scratching. Almost as if, just like this code character, someone has been stuck down there and a lot longer than they have. Hi, me from the future here. I know in this segment we're talking about the code character. It's labeled who is the code character. But when I mention Kara here, I'm actually talking more about the second narrator. I think it's pretty obvious that Kara is not the code character. They don't have the same cadence and they don't have the same personality. But it's pretty heavily implied that Kara is the second narrator here because it matches their personality a lot more. So keep that in mind for this next little segment of this segment. I just want to clear up a misconception that I perceive is going to happen. In the script, I implied that the code talker and the second narrator are the same person, albeit accidentally. I did not mean to write it like this, but that's how it ended up, and I perceive that people are going to misconstrue that I think they're the same person. I do not think they're the same person. I think they are two different people, completely separate from each other, at least in the sense of that they're not the same entity. They are not the same individual. That's it. I just want to clear that up because I foresee that happening in the future of people being like, why the fuck did you say that? And it's like, because I was being stupid. You know, I wrote it dumb. But, yeah, long story short, code talker, second narrator, different people. They are two different people. I just wanted to make sure I specified this because I don't feel like I did a very good job specifying it in the script. So consider this your warning of such that I fucked up. Oopsies. Alright, back to the video. Anyway, the next one, Kara. I think this is the most reasonable one of the 5. I go over this idea way more in depth later, so just kind of keep it in mind. It's pretty obvious that someone, most likely Kara, has somehow taken control over Kris. Those red eyes are a teller, and being extremely malicious and always framing Kris in a bad light certainly doesn't help their case. I mean, I don't remember if I mentioned it later in the script, but it's pretty important to remember that whenever Kris has an episode, it's always to make them look bad. The actions differ in morality, from eating pie to slashing tires, but again, they're always to make Kris look bad. Anyway, we'll talk about it later, keep it in mind. I came up with the idea that it could be Kris. It doesn't really make sense, but it kinda does at the same time. The idea is that Kris is getting pushed out every time that Kara or Gaster, whoever this red-eyed person is in control. Problem is, this theory doesn't actually make sense for when the player is in control. This is because we actually do know that Kris is aware of when we're controlling them. We can tell this because after the Spamton fight, Kris is noticeably aware and emotionally distressed despite our choices. This is because Kris sees a parallel between Spamton and Gaster and the player and Kris. They're both puppets being controlled by a higher power. And this is especially brutal for Kris because Gaster has some sort of control over Kris, meaning essentially he's having 2 of his puppets fight each other only for Gaster to win in the end. Like I said in my last video, Gaster wants Kris to die. If Spamton gets Kris's soul, then Spamton can go to the surface because it essentially makes him a lightener. From there, then Gaster can take over in return. So it's extra fucked up that Gaster is essentially just sending Kris to their death. I assume the extra emotional distress is because Kris realized that he is at the will of both Gaster and the player at any given time. And it's especially frightening to Kris because although Kris knows us, the player's intentions, through them, Kris doesn't know Gaster's intentions at all. Gaster's intentions are truly a complete mystery. And to Kris, that may just be the most frightening part. Lastly of the 5 candidates is a goner, which is a disciple or victim of Gaster. I would argue that regardless of who it is, any one of those options would qualify as a goner, so I'm gonna skip this and move on. Okie dokie, new segment. Remember that code character I was talking about? Let's get back into that. That code character completely changes the conversation with Spamton in the shop. Okay, first, let's build a scene here. We're gonna reevaluate Gaster. This theory makes Gaster out to be more malicious and in control than he puts on. In this circumstance, reimagine Gaster to be pulling the strings on the whole operation. The outcome in the endgame is still the same, but the process to get there is a little different. Imagine that Gaster really has complete control over Spamton. The phone in the background ringing, reminding him that Gaster is always watching. To put some greater perspective on this, dial tone, which is the name of this song, carries great importance. First off, dial tone is a rendition of a song named The Circus from Chapter 1. There's a great video by Hemp that shows this. Both Jevil and Spamton share the same story, both affected by Gaster. The only difference between the two is while Jevil had the power that Gaster was seeking, Jevil was uncontainable. Not literally, of course, but in terms of being a host body. I guess a better term would be uncontrollable. Gaster greatly underestimated how sporadic Jevil would be. All the power, but no control. Jevil doesn't listen to commands, and Jevil doesn't really think ahead. He's based in anarchy, doing whatever he wants whenever he wants to do it.
Do anything, chaos.
All he can think of is play and causing chaos. And that's bad for business, and bad for Gaster. Powerful enough to kill Kris, Gaster hopes, but not controllable or smart enough to follow a plan. Inevitably, Jevil fails.
Bye-bye.
But with his next pawn, Gaster had learned. Spamton is not free. He cannot do anything. In fact, he is kept on such a tight leash that his every action is monitored. If we go back to Spamton's dialogue, we can see this scene. Within this scene, Spamton talks out of line. He does have the tendency to disclose a little too much. The first red flag is when Spamton says, "I used to be the email guy, but now I'm the it burns, ow, stop, help me, it burns guy." Spamton has a little problem keeping his mouth shut and almost just revealed that he is no longer what he was. Remember, Spamton is trying to trick Kris into helping Gaster resurrect. Yes, that's still what we're going with here. So Kris having the best possible perspective of Spamton is a must. And that's why Gaster stops Spamton from talking through pain, which is a reoccurring factor here. You can actually pinpoint punishments of these type out because Spamton will disconnect from his mouth and start glitching out. Spamton's mouth in particular disconnecting, almost as if someone wants him to stop talking. Interestingly enough, it's actually during this exact scene when he starts bringing up Gaster, talking about the communion with an unintelligible laughter and Jevil. Spamton continues saying, but unlike Jevil, I'm actually gonna fucking listen to Gaster. After that, he's once again caught off by Gaster, but this time with a hard cut, as Spamton once again almost reveals what Gaster's plan is. To kill the player, disconnecting us from Kris, steal their body or their soul, and return to the surface. And that's why that hyperlink is blocked. To us, the player. Like I said last time, it's implied that Kris can hear Spamton because it freaks them out later. Now, here's where this theory is pretty much confirmed, or at least established in a vague truth. The theory that someone is in control of these people, it might not be Gaster, but someone at the end of the day is in control of these characters. In this circumstance for this theory, I'm going to keep it as Gaster just so it stays consistent, because I've said it was Gaster the entire time, so I might as well just keep it as Gaster. Spamton is about to start running his mouth about the night. Gaster, obviously, does not want Kris knowing anything about the night. This is because opening Dark Worlds is pivotal to Gaster's plan to resurrect, meaning that at this point in time, the less Kris knows about the night, the better. So Spamton, when talking about the night, catches himself and breaks character for a moment. Now I can definitely see how people miss this because it's actually pretty subtle. It's super easy to miss, but Spamton actually pauses after saying the word night. This is because Spamton didn't realize until he said it that night is a banned topic. But Spamton quickly catches himself and starts to beg with Gaster. Spamton, once again, then has his mouth disconnected from his head and begs.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Before very suddenly being forced back into a rambling rant about vacation days. You can actually tell when Spamton is talking out of character in the same way you can identify Gaster. By the way, this is why I still believe Gaster is somehow related to this. Salesman Spamton, as I'll identify him, only talks in capital letters, but talks normally when he breaks character. But it actually gets worse than this. I'm under the assumption that this entire scene within the shop is one massive power display by Gaster to Kris. If this is genuinely Gaster's display of control, then Gaster is terrifying. In this next scene, Gaster shows us, the player, what will happen to Kris when Gaster takes control. Remember that code character I talked about? Lost in the Void, right? Gaster actually lets them talk here. And truly, it is actually really fucked up. So I am 97% certain that this is them and it can't be Spamton. We already know that although Spamton is being monitored, he's still in control. Gaster just monitors what he's allowed to say. Spamton has made a deal with the devil, and this devil has a goal, and Gaster will do anything to achieve it. Spamton isn't like locked away, he's basically just being enslaved into being a salesman for Gaster. Now, we went over this in my last video, but under the friends option, Spamton says,
Mike.
What's important here that differentiates this voice not being Spamton is that he wasn't cut off. Not only this, but do you see that? See anything weird about this text? It's just like Dora, start pointing at your TV. One of these things is not like the other. If you guessed dialect, good job. If you didn't, to be honest, why would you have? But that's right. Look at those ellipses. They look a little familiar, right? I mean, that's a weird dialect shift compared to what Spamton was using before. And why does it seem so familiar? My god. It is straight up the exact same dialect down to the capital and the ellipses as our mysterious little code character. I cannot believe how nobody has mentioned this before. As far as I'm aware, I am the only person who recognized this. That is actually the code character, although it gives us nothing in type value information because they're talking through Spamton, which is even more malicious on the part of whoever's controlling them, if you ask me. The next thing Spamton says is don't believe the TV. The other time this happens is under the fear dialogue option, and this is genuinely the most terrifying part. Kris asks Spamton what he's scared of, and Spamton replies saying, there's nothing to fear except, implying fear itself, but he gets cut off. Suddenly, another voice is heard.
Can anyone hear me? Help.
Spamton then comes back to threaten the player, saying, huh? What? No, I didn't hear anything just now, but it sounded like they were talking to you. It should also be noted that Spamton is directly staring at you during this. And since I've added more context, I've come to believe that this voice is the Lost in the Code mysterious character. And the scary part about this is Gaster just straight up implied, Kris, there's nothing to fear except what I can do to you. Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway, speaking of Kris,
There was ghosts in your bladder. What the fuck? Yeah!
now this may be strange to think about, but how many people are in control of Kris? We know at the very least there are 4 people in possession of Kris at any given time. How do we know this exactly? Well, the first 3 are obvious. Number 1, the easiest, us, the player. Number 2, whoever's in operation of the soul during choices, most likely Kris's true nature. To add more context, if you didn't know, in Deltarune during choices, the soul will move according to Kris's true nature. Whatever they feel that their choice would be in that given moment, the heart will move ever so slightly towards that choice. And if you've never noticed this, you can boot up the game right now and see that the soul is never truly neutral. It's never really in the middle, always leaning towards something. And with this, people have come to the conclusion, such as I, that Kris's true nature is what resembles this movement with the soul towards different choices. That would be Kris's choice, the one that they're leaning towards. Lastly, the third is whoever this red-eyed fiend is. And then, of course, there's the not-so-obvious 2 inhibitors of the host. The all-but-confirmed Gaster, who was seen at the beginning, claiming he connects to Kris's soul. And finally, the least noticeable, the second narrator at the end of the intro. Also, a possible 5th, possibly the code character, but since we know so little about them, we're gonna have to wait until more content comes out about them to come to a conclusion, or even lay some foundation. Regardless of a fifth inhabitant, the mental turmoil is obviously getting to Kris. I would say that a majority of people think that Kris is the Red-Eyed Menace, but I disagree. Like I had stated before, every time that the Red-Eyed Menace is in control of Kris, they do something to make Kris look bad, as minuscule as eating pie to more severe like slashing tires. Not only this, but every time that the Red-Eyed Menace is in control, they open up another dark fountain. Almost as if, although I don't know what it is, they have some sort of endgame. This leads me to believe that someone else is at play here, somebody who has established a plan. Again, what that plan is, I have no idea. All I know is that they're cunning. This leads me to believe that the most likely scenario for this inhabitant would be Kara. But, yet again, I can't talk about that yet. We are almost there though, I promise. So, who is it then? Gaster? I wish it was that easy, but it never is. Although Gaster is 100% confirmed a part of Kris, I believe he works farther in the background rather than as a main antagonist. We can actually prove this with a neat little mini theory. This one's nice and simple too, so everyone can understand. Deltarune's dark worlds represent the lives and surroundings of real life. Gaster's presence and influence is following Kris everywhere and is part of that concept. That is why there has been a Gaster in every single dark world, just outside of the boundaries. So that leaves Gaster as an unnamed antagonist, a twist-tagonist if you will, or other unseen events. Speaking of unforeseen characters, just like for every single one of these theories, it is definitely possible for an unforeseen character to be the character of any of these theories. It could just be someone we have no idea who is and is new to the series. Still doesn't mean it's not fun to theorize though. Now let's expand a little bit more on something because I want to make sure my point gets across on this. Just a moment ago, I said that Gaster is 100% a part of Kris. But how could I possibly support that claim? Well, it's actually quite simple. And I just said this, but I'm elaborating on what I just said. So every dark world is created by the night, and Kris is the night, or at the very least they're creating the fountains. And the dark world ends up representing their surroundings. For example, the abandoned classroom is Card World, and the computer lab is the cyber world. These two locations are both representations of the real world around them. Since Noelle got swept up into the lab, the Queen is a representation of her feelings towards her mother. So to circle back, the question is, if dark worlds represent the real world directly around them and the people that surround them, why is Gaster a reoccurring theme in each one of them? But how is Gaster reoccurring? Where is he connecting in the real world? Well, technically, he's not. My theory is, since Gaster is inhabiting Kris, whenever Kris creates another fountain and therefore another dark world, Kris is then subconsciously, or without active thought, inserting Gaster into each of these locations. And since these locations represent the outside world, by extension, Kris at that moment is giving Gaster more outlets to insert himself into. Remember in the first video when I talked about the shadow crystals? Yeah, that theory was a little choppy, but it actually still works here. Yeah, scratch all that shit I said about being led, that was wrong anyway. Modified theory, Kris is the one creating the path. They don't know it though, that's important. Kris doesn't know that they're actually contributing to Gaster's plan. Gaster's just taking opportunity every time. My theory is still the same as the last video. Gaster's plan is to get one of his minions who he controls, so far it's been Spamton or Jevil, to kill Kris, steal their soul, and from there, Gaster will take control and free himself. Or, as a contingency plan, get Kris to collect all the shards of a Shattered Across the Void Gaster and reassemble him back together. From this point, Gaster most likely won't need Kris anymore, and from there, it's a matter of how to get out of that specific dark world. Which still stays the same as his original plan, kill Kris and become a Lightner and then go back up. It is further supported that Gaster's plan really is to keep Kris alive, because he's the one who keeps telling Kris to keep going at their death screen. This also further supports that Gaster cannot just take over Kris's body or soul, that, for some reason or another, some prerequisites have to be met. Anyway, that's the end of that theory. New theory. Alright, so this one's pretty fucking crazy. Try to remember way back in the beginning of the video. They established that, for some reason, Sans met Kris, Des, Noel, and Asgore at some point earlier than both Undertale and Deltarune, which directly contradicts Sans himself. When you first meet Sans as Kris, Sans doesn't recognize Kris, and Kris does not recognize Sans. And Sans says he had just moved to the town. Alright, so hear me out. This universe is where Sans is originally from. Now, I know what I said about timelines working side by side, but hear me out. We are gonna rework the timeline here to make this make sense. Because there is a genuine actual chronological order in which these series of events make sense. So, before we start, there is some context that we need to add. Before pre-Chapter 1 Deltarune, but also pre-Undertale, Sans somewhere meets Papyrus. We know that Papyrus is native to Undertale, or at least an Undertale sub-universe, and not a Deltarune universe because of their battles. Papyrus, unlike Sans, has a health bar. Not only this, but Papyrus turns to dust. Sans, on the other hand, does not. Sans bleeds, which is a trait specific to Deltarune monsters. But let's not get too off track. Let's get back to putting together the timeline. So, pre-Chapter 1 Deltarune Christmas takes place, and Sans is already with Papyrus. As far as I'm aware, this is the earliest event we know of surrounding Sans and Papyrus. The rest of pre-Chapter 1 takes place, then somewhere along the way, Sans and Papyrus get stuck in Undertale. I assume that Sans and Papyrus got to the Undertale universe utilizing that machine that's in the back of Sans' house. Getting in was easy, but getting out was the hard part, due to an unforeseen circumstance: the barrier. This magic barrier locked all monsters inside Mount Ebott, including Sans and Papyrus. Not only this, but it disabled his universe-hopping machine. This meant that no matter what, as long as that barrier stayed up, the Skeleton Brothers were indefinitely stuck in Undertale's universe. Supposedly, by the time that the Undertale player falls down Mount Ebott, Sans and Papyrus have been there for about a generation. We know this because the shopkeeper still remembers the day that they showed up. From here, the story of Undertale happens. Every timeline. Pacifist or neutral first, and then genocide last. This eventually leads to the Sans fight, where Sans will say a lot of dialogue, but importantly, these lines. In the pacifist route, Sans will be like, "Good job, you didn't do anything." And then if you go back and kill someone, he'll question you and call you gross. And so on for every level you go up. It's important to point out that most of the dialogue that happens within the judgment sequences or serious Sans conversations are directed not at Frisk, but the player. The only real deviation from this is during the save state route to get Sans' key. And the reason that this is almost precisely to bring both Frisk and the player to the conclusion that there are more than one universe. Almost to convince the player, stop resetting and let Undertale finish so that we can go save Deltarune. Hence, don't forget, because Sans is essentially in hell. Sans had feared that he had been in Undertale's universe so long that he would eventually forget why he was there to begin with. Side note, I don't think I talk about this in the video, but it just came to me. Don't consider this part of the theory. Consider this like kind of a mini theory. I did not plan this to be part of this theory. I'm only just thinking of it while I do the voice lines. So here's the idea. Sans may be from another universe where the roaring took place, just narrowly escaping onto that Christmas Eve. And he wrote down, "Don't forget," with the drawings of the cast, because Sans knows he has to go back there and save that universe before the roaring takes place again. Maybe a little bit of timeline shenanigans happened. Maybe he went a little bit back in time. Given another chance, who knows? Anyway, that was a neat little idea. Doomsday Sans theory, I'll call it. Back to the original one. Whether that was the roaring, or Gaster, or whatever other impending doom falls on Deltarune. So, essentially, back to the timeline, the story of Undertale goes through, and it has to be through Pacifist first. I say this because in Genocide, it actually ends permanently. If you have not played through the Genocide route of Undertale, it ends with you, the player, and Kara having so much control over this universe that you stop the timeline from continuing entirely. It's only until you persuade Kara that you can start the timeline again, and even then, Kara is still in control, which is then later confirmed in Deltarune, when Kara still has some control over both Kris and the player. This would explain that pesky second narrator. It's Kara who attached themselves to us, the player, persisting from Frisk over to Kris. Kara just had that much control over the universe that, just like in Undertale, they were able to parasitically attach themselves to another soul. And thus brings us to the beginning of Chapter 1, Deltarune. So this is how Deltarune's timeline works. Deltarune takes place after an Undertale neutral, genocide, and then pacifist route, in theory. And I know what I said about the timeline before, that genocide was last. I'm saying that there's another step after, which is another pacifist route. This timeline would explain why Kara still has some control, and why Sans is back in Deltarune. To dive further into this theory, that's clearly Grillby's, right? This means that Sans came from our Undertale timeline, but already met Kris pre-Chapter 1. But then this begs the question, why is Sans pretending like he doesn't know Kris? Well, this is because Sans does know Kris, and Sans is lying. Sans is lying not to Kris, but us, the player. You see, Sans is playing you, and he's playing you hard. Sans knows exactly who you are, player. Not only that, but Sans just confirmed that you know who he is.
We're gonna find that person.
Yeah.
When we do find him,
We're gonna kill him. You don't even know it, but you walked right into Sans's trap. Both of these dialogue options expose us, the player, in this situation. Great to see you again, is responded with, I've never met you before. Which again, is a lie. Sans has met Kris during Christmas. But we, the player, don't know that, exposing us as we go along with Sans's idea that they've never met Kris before. The other option, who the hell are you, directly contradicts the past, as Kris should know who Sans is. Both of these options expose the player's control over Kris. Sans is watching Kris. Sans is aware that Kris knows who he is. They spent an entire Christmas together. Sans is suspicious that Kris isn't acting like themselves. And by this point, Undertale has already happened. Therefore, Sans has put together that there are players, quote-unquote, capable of controlling humans against their will. And that last time an event like this happened, it broke the entire timeline and they were left completely powerless. So since Undertale, Sans has learned to approach these situations with a lot more precaution. Now, Sans is being even more careful than he was during Undertale, pretending that he doesn't even know Kris. In Deltarune, Sans does not question or threaten you like he did in Undertale. Instead, you expose yourself. Long story short, Sans is observing the player, watching you carefully and tracing what you're doing with your time in Deltarune. I perceive as things go on, we're going to hear a lot more from Sans about the lengths in which the player is going through just for genocide. About the enigmatic behavior of going through these incredibly convoluted means just to kill as many people as possible. And only then will that really expose that the genocide player, or Kara, is really back. But for now, Sans is playing the game of observation, a waiting game, in hopes to see who is really at bat here. Is it a pacifist player, or a genocide player? Or perhaps it's something else.
But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory.
Alright, now we're getting into some new theories. Some of them are not as long as others, but they are new nonetheless. So here's your content for the next year. Alright, so I'm sorry about the theory whiplash here, but we're back to Gaster isn't a supervillain. What exactly is Gaster's plan, and how can he even communicate with you during your death screen? Here's what I've come up with. Gaster is lost in this void code location, along with that other character. Gaster, just like this other character, is stuck there but under different circumstances. The Gaster that's stuck in the void here is most likely the same Gaster that fell into the core in Undertale, but I can't be certain. But what I do know is that Gaster has been there so long that he's begun to adapt. To better understand this concept, refer to Dr. Manhattan. In fact, it's pretty similar looking at the two stories. Gaster, a scientist, falls into his own machine and gets shattered across the universe, just like Dr. Manhattan. Now we're in the phase where Gaster has to rebuild himself. But, unlike Dr. Manhattan, Gaster can't do it alone. He requires Kris to pick up the pieces for him. So is Gaster evil? At first glance you may come to that conclusion, but it doesn't seem to be the case. Imagine that you were put in Gaster's situation. This is a means of survival. And Gaster just thought of a plan that could work. To him, Stephen Strange, it was the only way. Sorry, I've got Marvel on the mind. That last movie was really good. Remember, Gaster is a scientist, and he was the smartest monster by far. Gaster made do with what was the limited supply under Mount Ebit, so I'm led to believe even here he would stop at nothing, no matter the cost or means. Now, let's take a second to go over Gaster's life. Gaster was most likely born underground or forced underground. And after that, he died a miserable and ironic death, only to be seemingly put in an eternal prison again. Gaster, quite literally, is in hell. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if his thought process is to come back just to immediately kill himself again. After an eternity of infinite imprisonment with loss of all senses, I wouldn't be surprised if he just wants to put a stop to it once and for all. But continuing my theory, I believe the twist here is at the end of Deltarune. The idea I have in my head is we are headed to resurrect Gaster and give him the life he was robbed of. And most likely this code character as well. Now, I've been saying that Kris is off to resurrect Gaster, but more likely it's the player who is off to resurrect Gaster. Judging based off Kris's reaction after Neo, they don't seem to understand nor feel comfortable with why the player is going through with this. So more likely, Gaster is relying on the player to resurrect him. This means that in turn, Kris's desired path is more headed towards the general route of the main story. Alright, I'm going to be honest, I don't know if that qualified as a new theory, but now we're moving on to actual new theories. So this theory actually solves one of the more blatant issues in the previous video. I truly believe the Shadow Crystals are in fact W.D. Gaster himself. So yeah, that was one idea, but forget all that. What if I told you there was a highly credible theory that makes even more sense? Okay, to start, so what do we know about these Shadow Crystals? As some very helpful viewers pointed out in the last video, fellow commenter Calibri pointed out, and I'm paraphrasing here, the Shadow Crystals have so far only shown the light world equivalent for the dark world that you're currently in. The toys for the abandoned classroom, and the computers for the computer lab, end quote. Again, I'm paraphrasing. Knowing this, I can form a pretty solid theory around what the shard's function actually is. I am to assume that if you collect all of these crystals together, they would create a plane, because in the light world, or real life, they're shards of glass. Even though, yes, they're called crystals in the dark world, but in the light world, they are shards of glass. So the name and its light world equivalent implies that this crystal is not your typical quartz-type shape, but closer to a flat shard. This is further supported by Kris being able to look through it, as this action would be quite difficult if it was a typical quartz-type shape. Long story short, it'd be kinda difficult for Kris to look through a small shard of some sort of crystal, but if it was a larger shard, that of which a plane, it would be easier to see through. Using these deductions, the obvious conclusion is that these dark crystals are actually dark shards. And therefore, when these shards would be put back together, they would form a plane. So, where am I going with this exactly? From the title card, you probably already guessed it. I am implying that the function of the dark plane, which I'm deeming the name of the finished product of all the dark shards together, is a looking glass plane. To further elaborate, a portal. If you aren't familiar with the story, I happen to know it from an old black and white film. Long story short, there's this bitch named Alice who's on crazy pills. She's got this mirror in her house. This is post Alice in Wonderland, by the way. Alice, the clumsy fool that she is, takes yet another tumble, this time straight into the mirror. And surprise, surprise, the world inside of the mirror looks just like the world outside of the mirror, except fantastical and strange. Yeah, I think you can get where I'm going with this. It's very similar to how the Dark World works with Deltarune. So you may be thinking, how do I build off this? Because yeah, that's a neat idea to get everybody in and out, but how does that work with the theory I've already established? What would the point even be in linking location A to B here? I mean, Kris and Susie can get out just fine. Well, let's just say I have something, or someone, in mind. It's the same fucking person I've been talking about the entire video.
What the fuck, y'all? God damn! God damn! God damn! What? Fuck!
First, recall my host body theory. And 2, that Gaster's body in Undertale is gone. Poof, out of existence. And 3rd, but this is fact, every Undertale character to some degree at some point in time had a Deltarune equivalent. Okay, here we go. Kris is possessed to some degree by some portion of Undertale Gaster. We near the end of Deltarune, and by this point, Kara has probably been dealt with. This leaves only the player, Kris, and Gaster having control over the body. The player and Kris most likely came to some sort of compromise over the body. Kris then forms the Looking Glass portal in hopes to bring all his Darkener friends to the Light World. Little did both Kris and the player know, this would probably be the worst mistake they could have made. Putting together the Looking Glass created a two-way portal from the Light World to the Dark World. Gaster sees this as the perfect opportunity to strike. It had been foreshadowed from the beginning that he had some sort of parasitic attachment to Kris's soul. Gaster, unexpectedly, takes control of Kris's body. Biding his time, you had just given Gaster exactly what he wanted. Here, Gaster will make a beeline to find the Deltarune equivalent of Gaster's body, most likely in the bunker. It's either this location or the abyss of the open lake. It's at one of these locations where Gaster will then plan to transfer Kris's soul, which is now in Gaster's complete control, to his dead Deltarune body. This will resurrect Gaster through determination, an equivalent to how we saw Azrael and Kara during Undertale. And unlike Undertale bodies, Deltarune bodies don't melt because they're biological and not made of magic. This allows Gaster to finally live once again, not as an entity or a concept, but as a monster with a body. This body will give Gaster the means to travel back to the Undertale timeline, where he'll do something else, I don't know. This will lead to some sort of conflict, and then something else will happen, and then Chapter 9 will end. That's my Chapter 9 theory. My god, I have talked a lot about Gaster in this video, like way more than I remember writing in this script. Anyway, that's enough about Gaster. Let's talk more about Gaster.
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!
So, I kinda just went over this, but I want to specify, in theory, there are 2 Gasters. In theory, this relies on the idea that there is a duplicate Deltarune clone for those of Undertale, and that these 2 characters can exist in the same universe at different times without a paradox taking place. So this is kind of deviating a little bit, but the idea is that Kris is possessed by Undertale Gaster, while Deltarune Gaster is the man giving eggs. The 2 Gasters theory is super jittery and fucked up, so take it as you will, honestly. Any grain of salt will be fine in my book. The concept is there for a second Gaster theory, like Deltarune Gaster and Undertale Gaster for some reason are conflicting. This explains why Deltarune Gaster can only exist just outside of the Dark World, with the tree just outside the bounds of reality. This would be because Undertale Gaster is overthrowing this Dark World with his own influence. Basically, since Undertale Gaster is operating in the Dark World, Deltarune Gaster is getting pushed out. Regardless, it's a super loose theory. This is definitely one of those wait for more content theories to take a stance on.
Mommy lets you use her iPad.
So in this segment, I handpicked a couple of comments from the last video that I thought were interesting or informative. There were some really good ones in here, so I just want to give them some spotlight. I'm also going to give my summary or my opinion on how I feel about that comment, if it's talking about a theory or something. Also, I may be paraphrasing a lot of these, because I do remember I did not copy these word for word. Alright, let's begin. Here we have a commenter's theory. Commenter Bean writes, "Another thing possibly related to Gaster in the Dark Worlds is that I believe that entry 17 might be referring to Gaster entering/opening a dark fountain. It seems to line up quite well. Dark, darker, yet darker. The darkness keeps growing, shadows cutting deeper, photon readings negative. That just leaves the question of who you two are, though the common theory would be Sans and Papyrus. Alphys would be out of the question due to her not being a scientist at all in Deltarune's story." And that's the end of the comment. I actually think this is a pretty good theory. This would establish how Gaster is aware of Dark Worlds, and possibly why he has more control over it compared to the real world. This would also clear up the mystery of the man behind the tree, because Gaster would have a better understanding of how to make himself temporarily seen in the Dark Worlds. I mean, that is if second Gaster isn't a thing. The next comment, commenter Ivy Thay, wrote, "That actually doesn't make sense. Gaster speaks in all capitals. This is something that, at the time of making that video, I didn't fucking know. I actually didn't know this, and it's true. Even in the intro, he speaks in all capitals. On the Deltarune website, also speaking in all capitals. Even on Twitter, he speaks in all capitals. Thank you, Ivy, as that 100% confirms that Gaster is not speaking as both the second narrator and during that one Spamton scene. Good catch, I like when people pay attention." Our next commenter, Dark Riku, says, when referring to Gaster possessing Kris, "That would work if it was Kris's soul, but it's not, it's ours." Again, I'm paraphrasing, because I only want to go over certain things in the comments, not the entire thing. Fortunately, I got the chance to reply to this comment, saying, quote, "I still think this can work. That might be why Gaster can't take over Kris's body, because we, the player, are already occupying the slot of Possessor. So what could be happening is Gaster, instead of trying to convince Kris to give up their soul, is manipulating the player to do it." End quote. And as I've stated enough times in this video, I still believe this to be true. A one-slot controller situation could be why at the end of every chapter, we lose control of Kris and they go off to do their own thing. And again, to elaborate on this idea, I don't think Gaster is the one in control of Kris during those episodes. As this would defeat the purpose, he would have already gained what he wanted. In that situation, it just makes more sense for it to be Kara or Kris themselves. Alright, that wraps up this section. I may do this again, so leave some comments down below. I don't know what video I'll do it for, but I might do it for another one of these if I end up making like a Chapter 3 video. Alright, we've hit the home stretch. We're nearly done here. Lastly, I've got some new theories straight from my head. So I hope you'll accept my loose concept of the word theory, because occasionally I do get theory and analysis intertwined. To start off into this next theory, think for a moment. When does Deltarune take place and how did we get here? What exactly set this whole thing off? Well, since we have some reoccurring characters, let's look at Undertale for context. Undertale begins with a PowerPoint presentation that states the legend as such. Long ago, two races ruled over the Earth, humans and monsters. One day, war broke out between the two races. After a long battle, the humans were victorious. They sealed the monsters underground with a magic spell. And many years later, and then the story of Undertale starts. But that's not actually the entire truth. In actuality, Undertale begins when a child named Kara dies tragically. A child named Azrael absorbs their soul and heads to the surface, post-war. From there, Azrael confronts a village of people with a now-dead Kara in their arms. Azrael had hoped to bury them, but justifiably, to the humans this situation looked bad. Azrael was viciously attacked, but showed mercy. Azrael, now wounded, made his way back to Mount Ebott and at the end of this journey succumbed to his wounds. The Mount Ebott monarchy lost 2 children in one day. This event broke the kingdom apart, and from here jump-started the story that is Undertale. So what's my point? Well, what if I told you that I could fix all of it? What if I told you that, theoretically, I could remove the tragedy altogether? Well, that's exactly where this theory stems from. Within this theory, Deltarune takes place in a universe where the humans lost. Now, this concept isn't unfounded, or even unconsidered. To some, it may be considered pretty obvious. But to those who may not have thought of this, there's some telling signs. First, the most glaring, the world of Deltarune was always a little off. As far as I'm aware, there's no mention of a war. But strangely, despite the lack thereof said war, there's no humans in sight besides Kris. It gets stranger from here. There's little to no ancient human influence at all in Deltarune, aside from one glaring thing. A bunker that lies just outside of town. Now, I don't know about you, but typically bunkers are used to hide from things. Hide from things like danger. It has also been established that, unlike Undertale, there's no magic in Deltarune, at least in the real world. And this is important. Because within our concept, it would mean that inevitably when the war between monsters and humans took place, humans were most likely greatly overpowered by the monsters. Like the name Deltarune referring to Undertale implies, we are most likely watching a swap of roles. What if the humans were forced underground instead of the monsters? And I can hear some of you asking, well, okay, let's consider this to be true. Then why the hell is Kris hanging out with the monsters? And I believe this to be easily explained. In Chapter 2, we see Kris's fellow peers contemplating going into the bunker. Problem is, they are hesitant, scared, and they claim Kris has some sort of info about what's inside. The two scamper off, and we're left to speculate. How does Kris know what's inside if it's been locked for quite a while? And why do Monster Kid and Snowy mention the word kids? Specifically, like Kris when contemplating entering the bunker. This information has guided me to believe that Kris's origins may actually be from inside the bunker. Let me lay the scene for you. All of humanity lives in this bunker. Plenty of food, survival supplies, whatever. The generations pass, but inevitably, something happens. Let's say, for example, the power goes out, a gas leak, water leak, or something as simple as bad crops one year. Possibly even multiple problems at once. The point is, underground life is going south. As time goes on, the generations start to die off and hope is starting to crumble. Humanity's numbers are starting to dwindle. By this time, generations have passed, and the origins of why humanity is in this position in the first place is lost to time. All they know is that what awaits them outside the bunker is not on their side. Soon there's little of humanity still kicking, close to nobody left. Eventually, we reach the last family. We reach the day that one of Kris's parents eventually dies, thus leaving us with one surviving family. A family of two. A baby and a parent, most likely born in the bunker, never being told of why they were in there in the first place. To make matters worse, the surviving parent knows that they too are not long for this world, and they're succumbing fast. Kris was born mere days ago, maybe months. Completely innocent, yet subjected to this incredibly cruel fate. Born in prison to die in prison. Looking at their child while fading in and out of consciousness, they think to themselves, this isn't fair. To have Kris die here in this dark and lifeless bunker, this is cruel. It's much too late for this, but I wish I could have given you a better life. But with Kris in their arms, peering into the dark empty void of that staircase, the thought came to them. Something that hadn't been seen in quite a while. A glimmer of hope. But an action that had filled them with great dread. There was only one viable option left. One that seemed insane, but being the only ones alive and this gamble most likely being the last action they'll ever make, what choice did they really have? Either dying in cold here while subjecting Kris to a short life of misery, or open the bunker, unknown to what awaits them outside. Weighing the two options, they gather their courage. At this point, it's all or nothing. With each step, both exhaustion and despair follow suit. The mystery and potential danger of what's on the other side can't help but linger. They contemplate and they ponder, but finally, they're here. They're at the door. Standing there, they freeze. For a moment. They didn't think about it before, and the delusions of death surely aren't helping, but it's so real now. It's not quite as impactful as the future of humanity resting on their shoulders, but what's left of it surely is. Not only that, but it's their child. Their flesh and blood, the only remaining family connecting them to this planet. Would it be selfish to want to spend just a minute more with them? But looking at their face with their vision fading, they knew what had to be done. Despite their fears, the moment is now. No more waiting, no more prison, no more bunker. If this be our last moment, let it be visions of the real world. The world we were born into, not the one forced upon us. Hand on the bar, they lift it and with a final commitment swing open the doors expecting the worst. But, to their surprise, only to see fresh air, trees, and bright sun. Exhausted, dying and delusional, they didn't even have time to comprehend the irony of the situation. That, just like the humans, for monsters, the war was decades, maybe centuries past. It was a distant legend. The age of war was over. The world had evolved beyond such tribal solutions to societal problems. The monsters had developed education, science, medicine, functioning society, even higher education. It wasn't perfect, but it was a functioning and complex society. But to the human, none of it mattered, because in their final moments, they just took time to appreciate the world. They just stood there, mesmerized by it all. But alas, death waits for no one. The remaining parent came to the conclusion that regardless of what happens, Kris was a representation. They were their hope. But as they looked back into that gaping abyss of a staircase, they thought, there is no hope in there. With this, they decided that hope should stay here, where it's needed, and that this, the bunker, a representation of cruelty and suffering, should never be seen again. If this should be my child's last moments, it should be of hope. While on the other hand, I am an impression of that world. The world of pain, cruelty, and suffering. With this gave the remaining parent great resolve in their impending moments, but satisfied, they affirmed themselves. This life that's bound by chains, it ends with me. Now, not to give you some tonal whiplash, but this scene gives a symbolic parallel to Undertale's barrier. I mean, obviously, of course it does because I wrote it. I mean, it's literally a fictional story I'm giving to a pair of two red doors, but I digress. Undertale's barrier, the seal from humans to monsters, is a physical barrier, designed as a universal lock. While on the other hand, this barrier, sealing the monsters away from the humans, is more symbolic. It's less about sealing monsters from humans, that was already done before. It's about sealing the old world from the new world. The way of war versus the modern era, the era of peace. Even though they lost ages ago, it's a symbolic end to the war. Humans lost, and even though monsters moved on decades ago, humans were still fighting. Fighting meaning surviving, albeit underground, but to them, they never left the war. Just like in Undertale, when the monsters never really left the war after the humans sealed them. They lived as if they were still at war, despite there not being one. Even though Kris's parents probably weren't aware of it, just as, in parallel, most Undertale monsters aren't. But regardless, this was it. The defining moment. This proved that humans, they lost the war. But again, none of it mattered. This lifestyle wasn't even about war anymore. To that remaining parent, it was the beauty of the outside world versus nothing inside the bunker. And despite knowing the old world was filled with despair and tragedy, they took it upon themselves to finalize it. In the end, humanity was cruel, selfish and violent, greedy and scathing to one another. But Kris never knew of this old world. In fact, Kris knows nothing of humanity. Kris belonged to this new world. The new and complex, developed monster world. Not the old, war-ridden humanity world. And so, Kris's parents showed them mercy, and decided to spare Kris of the fate of the old world. The old world, that of cruelty and pain, humanity died with them. And as their parent laid Kris in the grass in front of the bunker, the screeching of the decayed metal door echoes through the forest as it shuts for the last time. It was this moment, the last of humanity. And with the sealing of the bunker, nobody will be subjected to bear witness to the cruelty of what took place there, ever again. Moments pass, when, suddenly, footsteps growing closer. It's a monster, with a toddler by her side. They were taking a walk through the forest. A goat family, to be exact. Child not much older than the one that lay foot at the bunker. They hear the cries of the infant and find it in its lonesome. In great confusion, and seeing no parent around, she takes it upon herself to raise this child as her own. And thus, this baby was adopted into the Dreamer family. A brother named Azrael, a mother named Toriel, a father named Asgore, and a baby who they named Kris. Then a long time passes and a lot of stuff happens, and then chapter 1. I can sure as hell bet you weren't expecting a fucking narrative when you clicked on this video, were ya? Alright, last one, very short. Is Kris both Kara and Frisk in one body? The first thing many will notice if they played Undertale is Kris seems to be a merge of both Kara and Frisk visually. Some of you may think, well, it's more Kara than it is Frisk, but actually it's more obvious in the Dark World. Take a look at Exhibit A. Alright, take a look right there. Right on Kris's shoulder. What do you see? It's like a cape, right? Great visual design, right? Everybody loves a shoulder cape. So heroic, so creative, so colorful. Now, wait a minute. Where have I seen those colors before? That's right, my dear viewers. It's literally Frisk's sweater. It's especially blatant when Kris moves. Now, it's not 100% proof or anything, but it certainly does help build a scene when your protagonist is strutting the previous protagonist's color like it's their favorite sports team. The way it seems, if in this circumstance we assign that Kara is Dennis the Menace, then Kara only operates when Kris is in... What the fuck am I talking about? Genuinely off script, I have no idea what the fuck that was supposed to mean. I have no idea why I wrote that. Was the implication that Dennis the Menace only works when people are unconscious? This concept may also help understand why Kris is having such trouble keeping control, because they're fighting both Frisk and Kara respectively all the time. Continuing, then Kara only operates when Kris is unconscious. Well, except for that one time. Maybe it's a testament that Kara is gaining more control over Kris's body. Or maybe I'm just wrong about the whole thing and I'm talking out of my ass. Alright, thank you for watching. You lasted the whole way through. You made it to the end. My voice is fucking dead. I just want to take this time to once again shout out to all the fellas who keep this community alive, both Deltarune and Undertale. There are so many talented people and I am not one of them. I am a hack! On another note, don't expect another scripted video like this for a while. I'm gonna be honest, these are fucking hard. Multiple days now I've killed my voice, and multiple days I've fucked up my OBS settings trying to make it sound just right. At least, I hope it sounds just right, because I'm at the end of the video. But let's be honest, nobody gives a shit about all that. The woes of a YouTuber Andy, am I right? Anyway, thank you for any subscribers who stuck around for the long haul. The rest of my channel is absolute dog shit, so fuck if I know why. Nah, I'm just kidding. I make content for this reason. I live to entertain. I'm a costumeless clown. With that recorded and set on public record, like and subscribe if you want to, but no pressure really. I mean, I get it if you don't. I post like once a year, but it'll definitely incentivize me to do more if I know what content you guys like. Okay, for everyone who was just here for Deltarune, that's over now. You can go home. Stage lights are off. For everybody who's left, you get a little bit more of me. Let's chat for a while. Since I'm just kind of talking, I'm super bummed that I lost the majority of the Death Stranding retrospective video, and I'm especially bummed because it's not cancelled. I have to remake the entire fucking thing, and it's like 6 hours long. I'm probably gonna make it when the sequel comes out. I just kind of foresee that happening. I'll play the sequel and I'll be in a mood and I'll be like, I'm gonna make this now. And then I'm gonna quit in like a week because I don't want to make 6 hours of content, and then I'll be like, why did I decide to do this? Speaking of taking way too long to do things and then quitting halfway through, I do art now. I mean, I'm garbage, but like, practice makes perfect, right? Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever do anything with this. If I do, it'll be pretty neat, but I don't foresee that I'm ever gonna do anything about it. Nonetheless, when I post about it on YouTube, I don't know, I might. Depends. You'll see when you'll see. You know what? Here's a reward for sticking around. This is a still frame from a canceled project that I had planned about a year ago. It was a gigantic project, and honestly, just was not really possible with my art capabilities and my editing capabilities. And my music capabilities and every other capability. It was just like a massive project. There was no way I was going to be able to finish it. And even if I did finish it, it would have ended up being not what I wanted it to be, which was like the main contender of why I canceled it. Regardless, extra points if you can tell what it's from. Now it's time for some shameless plugs. I stream on Twitch. Most recently I streamed Monster Hunter World, which eventually I'll do a video on, but I haven't started scripting that one yet. Speaking of future content, there's actually a lot of fun stuff coming up. There's a gigantic project coming up soon. Expect that one in a couple of months to a couple of weeks. It's nearly done, it just needs some polishing. Probably a couple of months, I hope. It's definitely not going to take a year. And that should be the last thing I have to say. Thank you for staying this long. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that I met your very, very low expectations. And with my parting, here's a little sneaky peeky.